Thank you very much for attending today on the socially distancing in the workplace workshop. So today we're going to be looking at how we need to implement socially distancing, and we need to be looking at getting back into the workplace. So first of all, just as I say, to welcome Jill, who will be delivering part of today's session, myself, Peter Daniel, who will be going through the main part of the first part of the session. This is delivered by the Grow My SME program, which is funded by the Humber Growth Hub. Any further information that you require from today, please do contact them. They're a great resource to see what is going on and to find more projects and more support that is available for businesses. We do encourage as many questions today as we can. It is all about trying to help you. It is all about trying to answer those questions you may have. So to do that, you will see the question function on your screens. If you put those in at any time during the presentation, we have a time at the end when we'll come back and answer those questions. So put them in during the presentations as they come to you, and we'll review those at the end. So without further ado, we'll make a start. First of all, just to introduce myself, my name is Peter Daniel. I'm a Senior Business Advisor for Blue Orchid, and I'll be taking you through the first part of today's session. Main things I'll be talking about is looking at what we need to do from a legal aspect, how we can implement this social distancing, this new thing that people have come across over the next few weeks into our businesses and still maintain a business. My background is partly in construction and partly in larger businesses, where I have worked and helped these businesses in terms of creating risk assessments, policies and procedures for things like lone working from home, as well as working from groups. I'm NEBOSH qualified, and the main things I'll be talking today is really about how to make risk assessments actually usable. That's really what I want to talk about, is risk assessments and making them really usable so they can actually benefit you and not just be that piece of paper that you have to do. I'll introduce now Jill, who will be taking you through the HR aspect of today's session. So Jill, if you'd like to.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, Peter. So my name's Jill Batterby. I'm a HR consultant for Humber HR People. I've worked in HR for many years, too many years for me to remember, and lots of diverse range of industries and different sectors, with very small to medium businesses and also corporate businesses. So today, I just want to take you through some HR key considerations, really. So just touch the surface with some things you might need to think about as you plan to bring people back to work. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jill. Apologies, we seem to be having a slight issue in the screen share at the moment. Hopefully it's all back up and running. We had it all working a few minutes ago when we were just testing it, and then for some reason it just seems to have paused, but hopefully it's all back up and running now. So the first bit we're going to be talking about, we know that there is this now timescale that the government have announced for getting back into the workplace. We've looked at this over the last couple of weeks in terms of what's been released and how they're looking at getting people back in. I want to just set the scene here. It isn't something that all businesses are going back to in one go. It is a phased return, and they're using this phased wording quite a bit. So we need to think about how we're going to go back. We need to think about what businesses are opening and how we can open. And it is going to be the case if we're going to have to make some changes. We are going to have to make some changes to the business. We're going to have to look at how we can mold our business to the new normal. And this key word of new normal seems to be coming up all the time. So what are the changes? What are the timescales that we're looking at? Well, some businesses have been able to start opening in the last week or so. People have been allowed out more, which means that business has started to change. Certainly I've seen more things like a few coffee shops starting to open for takeaways, which indicates that there's more people, more passing trade coming along. So we need to think about these changes, not just from what businesses can open, but what the Joe public can do. Schools are going to be a massive one here. When we're talking about schools going back, they're talking about schools being phased return from the 1st of June. Well, what does that mean? I've got 2 young kids myself, so working from home with 2 young kids is difficult, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. So this phased return of school kids will mean more ability for people to go out, work more, and more of a normal lifestyle to come back. So we're thinking about what does that mean, how does that mean, and what sort of age groups are we talking about? And this comes to any business, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in retail, it doesn't matter, because it will have an effect on you, because it has an effect on people's lifestyles. When we're talking to July, hospitality's starting to open, and hopefully by that point, sometime in July, we'll be able to see most businesses being able to open in some format. It may not be how you used to run, and to be honest, let's be honest, it's not going to be the same world as we left a few months ago. Certainly, people will be a lot more online. People will be a lot more, have that more confidence to use online, more confidence to come on these sort of workshops and use technology like this. So that's something you've got to build into it. But anyway, that's just setting the scene. So now I'm going to talk about social distancing. I'm going to talk about what it actually is and what does it mean for your business. Well, okay, what is social distancing? First of all, lots of different countries have slightly different views on this one. But it's basically keeping a physical distance away from yourself and others. That reduces the spread, and we've heard all about this R number, keeping that R number down so that basically we don't get overwhelmed, we don't have that large number of cases again. So it's really, really important. Exactly how far is it away? Well, the government in the UK suggests 2 meters, 6'6". Okay, so you've got to keep 2 meters, 6'6" away from somebody, and you've got no problems. That's what they're saying. Okay, now, is that true? Is that not? Well, that's something we're going to talk about when we talk about risk assessments. But that's the recommended distance that people say you need to keep away from somebody, and a key point you need to start thinking about. Okay, right, so why do we need it? Well, as I say, it helps prevent contact. Contact is the key thing here. We know that COVID-19 is shared by contact, so we need to slow that down. One of the other things here we need to think about is what people's views are. How many times have you been passed in the street by somebody, you know, you've been out for your run or something like that, and you've been passed a bit too close? Well, what does that mean? How does that make you feel? And that's one of the main things we need to start thinking about now. How do people feel? We need that reassurance it's safe. Just because we've been told to keep 2 meters away from it, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a recommended guideline. So we need that reassurance, and you need to do that thought process about your business and how it can move forward to make sure that you are not just adhering to any guidelines that is there, but you're also adhering to any social guidelines that are there, what people actually think going forward. And that really is the point when we're talking about risk assessments. Risk assessments are very difficult to do sometimes, but they're also very easy, and you'll do them on a day-to-day basis. But a lot of this is about reassurance. It's not about what you have to do, what you can do, because I can guarantee most of you will do more than the minimum requirement, because that's what's needed going forwards. Who are you protecting? Well, this is the first thing. You are protecting your workforce. This is the primary concern, is going to be your workforce, number one. And there is no new legislation out there. So if you've been running a business for a long, long time, the legislation for the COVID thing doesn't change the protection of your workforce. Your protection of your workforce was there before. For those of you who have got a decent health and safety policy, you'll know that under Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, you have to protect your employees. It's your duty as the employer to protect them. Equally, there is a section in there for your employees to support that. So they have to adhere to what regulations you put in place. And none of that has changed. Yeah, it was there before, and the fact that COVID-19 is just a single possible issue is something we need to think about. So do we need to change anything is the question. Well, theoretically, no, would be the answer to this one. Theoretically, there is no change you'd need to make, just there is a risk here which has been highlighted, and a risk that you need to establish whether it's got a problem in your business. So first things first, I'm going to talk about a couple of businesses, and I'm going to make up a couple of examples here. Example number one, I'm going to use myself. So I deliver business support. I deliver business support on a one-to-one basis most of the time, also in terms of workshops and things like this. Well, what does it mean? Does it change how I operate? Yes, it does. It makes people a bit more aware of the technology. It makes people a bit more aware and worried about going into group situations. But could I sit 2 meters away from somebody delivering a one-to-one session? Yeah, I could. It wouldn't change it. It's no different to me doing any other workshop. So realistically, nothing much has changed. The risks haven't changed too much, apart from I know people are going to be concerned. So I'll put things in place to stop that concern, one of which will be delivering and offering online support. So we need to think about this. It is all about the thought process, and it is all about planning that one through. So first, people we need to protect: workforce. Key consideration, and something you'll all be considering, how you make changes to your working environment to make it safe for people returning. The second one we'll be looking for will be your clients. We'll be looking at your clients. So I'm just I'm moving through and going to come back to those slides just for the way it is. So next one is you're going to be your customers. You also have a duty to protect your customers in the same way as your employees. It doesn't change. So this is people out, people visiting your shops, people just coming and coming into your offices. So we need to look at ways we can do this. So we need to ensure that they are also protected here. We need to make them feel safe again. So both the customers and your employees, they need to feel safe. They need to know what's happening. And this is the key point I'm going to go on several times, is about the marketing that you need to do. The marketing you need to do. So going forward, what might we see? Well, we might see reduced numbers allowed in stores. These are the key things that people are going to be looking at. We might see longer queues and longer waiting times. We certainly are going to see reluctance of customers to visit shops and use some facilities. But we're definitely going to see a greater use and acceptance of online shopping. We have already seen that. We've already seen social media increase. We have already seen people ordering online. And actually, just minutes before we now a text from things have changed. People have changed. So we need to make sure we're fairly confident on that. So this thing I want to be concentrating on, more time on really, is not necessarily all of the bits and pieces that could be, would be, should be, is more about what is a risk assessment and how we do it. I have a big bone to pick with a lot of these big companies who do risk assessments which are 20 pages long. I don't like that because I find them not very useful. And the key thing with a risk assessment is it should be one of the most used documents you ever have. So, who of you have already done a risk assessment? Who of you have looked at risk assessments? Well, I'm going to say everybody has done a risk assessment. You do a risk assessment every day when you get up. You get up, you walk to, go and have a shower, whatever, and there's something lying on the floor. Oh, hang on, I'll pick that up and I'll put that away so that I don't trip over it. You've just done a risk assessment. And that's all you got to do. There are lots of people, I'm going to say, and I'm going to put this out as a warning here. There are lots of people asking for people to come in and do risk assessments. I myself have been asked to do risk assessments on behalf of companies for COVID-19. These are generic risk assessments, and personally, I don't think they should ever be used. Yes, you might want to look at them for a great template or something like that. That's all they are. They are only a template. So don't use that as your health and safety policy. I think given the future, there will be an issue where HSE, councils, the two enforcing bodies for risk assessments and health and safety will come down harsh on businesses who have used those and feel that they're safe because they've got that piece of paper. The risk assessment is not that piece of paper, it's the implementation of it. Because all they are methods used to decide priorities. That's all you're trying to do. You're trying to see what you can do. So let's take you through the process to start off with. Well, first things first, we need to assess the hazard. Some of you will have varying hazards. So you might have a big open plan office. What's the hazard there? Well, the hazard there is the interaction. We've been encouraged for years to have more interaction in our workplaces, open plan offices, hot desking, and all that sort of thing. Well, that creates a spread of germs. People touching things. We know that. So we identified the hazard there. People using the same computer, hot desking. Okay, so there's a hazard. It might be people going out in teams. It might be, well, where do people congregate? So they're congregated entrances, things like that. So we're looking at the hazard identification. So first hazard is movement of germs. COVID-19 being one of the hazards. Okay, people interacting with people. Who are the people at risk? Well, for offices, it's going to be your staff. For shops, it's going to be customers and staff. So we mark down who's at risk. And then we start looking at the risk level. Well, first of all, we can have a very, very, very low risk. If you are working as yourself in an office, you've got self-contained offices, your good old-fashioned office block style thing where you're in those sort of pods, the risk could be fairly low. So the changes you need to make are fairly low because you're in those single groups. Whereas if you've got an open plan office, the risk gets greater. Bringing new people in, so customers, even more so, because you're getting outside that customer zone. So evaluating the risk. That's when we start putting controls in. And the controls are the key points here. So what are the controls? Well, first of all, let's look at what we've got existing. Let's look at what's available to us. Secondly, is when we start putting into additional controls, as in what we can do to prevent things. What I mean by that is reduce the ability for things to happen. Work from home if we can. That's the government's advice. And that's the advice that anybody should be taking on board. Reduce the risk. There's lots of things about PPE. Should I wear masks? Should I put screens up? Well, no, I'm going to say, not unless you have to. First of all, eliminate the risk, eliminate those contact points. So we reduce interactions as the first point. We look at interactions. And there's just a little fact there that online sales in March hit a record high. 22.3% of all sales were online, which doesn't sound very much, but is huge in comparison to what was only in single digits only a couple of years ago. Reducing that interaction, making things more remote, reduces interactions, and things can't spread. I cannot spread anything to you by you sitting on the other end of a computer. So look at things you can do that. Click and collect. It's a great way of doing it. I know loads of companies that are doing a click and collect service. You pull up, drive through, open your boot, stick it in the back, off you go. No actual interaction at all. So therefore, no chance of any spread. This means there's no PPE needed. There's no additional things needed. So when we're looking at how our business may have to change, this is one of the things that we may have to look at. We may have to move to this more online, retail-based product. And if you're not in retail, if you're in industry, I'm going to say, have a look at your retail brethrens, see how they do things, and see if you can implement that into your workplace. Because there's a lot of synergy between the two. You might be able to implement certain things, and they might be able to implement certain things that you do. So you need to have a look across aspects, across industries. Another thing we might want to do is reduce numbers of people. I put enter in the store there, but this is equally as important for people entering offices. So can you reduce that? How do we do that? Well, if you're in office, it's fairly straightforward. We may want to stagger the times that people start. So that might be 15 minutes. That might be 10 minutes. That might be shifts at completely different times. But what we probably do want to do is avoid those shifts where shift finishes and the next shift starts. We need to have that sort of overlap now, which, yes, may increase costs, and it's something you need to build into your cash flow. You need to build all this in to see what effect this has going forward on a long-term basis, because I'm afraid it is here for the long term. We may need to have separate exit and entrance points for customers. We may need to look at our routes around and have sort of one-way systems through various office blocks, through various shops, and see how you can get people interacting and reducing those interactions because of that. And encourage people to work alone. And that's a very difficult thing to do. I've always worked alone, so it's not a big issue to me, but certainly we need to think about the mental health of people here. Working alone can be very difficult. Shopping alone can be very difficult. But if we can encourage that and encourage people to do that, then that also reduces those interactions. Reducing these interactions reduces the amount of other things we need to put in place. One thing I will say here is a lot of these, yes, may have increased costs, less customers in the shop, overlap of staff in terms of entrance and exits, so that we're not entering and exiting at the same time. But these will be a lot less cost than any issues you might have if COVID-19 does take place in your work or take hold in your workforce or your customers. And also, it's a hell of a lot cheaper than putting PPE in place. So it's always the first thing we need to do. Other things we might want to do is think about your restocking, think about your deliveries and how they work. So think about the whole process. As I say, I'm going to work on 2 or 3 examples here, and the first one was myself. The second one I'm going to say is good old Tesco's or big shop like that. Well, one of the things I'm sure they're doing, I hope they're doing, is starting to schedule their deliveries better. They're looking at making sure there's not 2 lorries coming in at the same time, so there isn't those interactions. The lorries will not come in at the same time as the staff. The lorries will not come in during opening hours, we're not restocking at that time. So again, you might be restocking shelves, things like that, during times when customers are not there with staff that are there. Okay, so you're using that time so there's no interaction between customers and staff. You're keeping things separate. Your manufacturing, again, same sort of principle might apply, that restocking the deliveries, if you can, you try and schedule those for when people aren't exiting and egressing the industry in the factory. They're not moving back and forth. I know for some people that isn't possible because of restrictions in terms of access and things like that. But again, this might be something you need to go, right, okay, we need to establish whether we can change those times, whether we can go back to our planning and say, look, because of this, we could do with extending these times. Is there any problems with that? You never know what might come back. And it might become a more efficient way of working. And efficiency is something which we need to build into this one, because we need to have a working program that is actually usable for us, and not one that ends up being something which is unusable or increases costs too much. We're not looking at doing that. We're looking at actually keeping those costs to a minimum and looking at things that are everyday, straightforward things we can do. One of the big things that they've spoken about in a lot of these documents, and I don't know if anybody's read all 7 of those documents that they actually produced, as well as the first one that said very little, but they have spoken about fresh air, and fresh air seems to have a positive impact on reducing down infection rates. So try and keep fresh air coming in throughout your business. Not only is it good for health, but it, in general, but it also reduces down the risk. It's all about reducing down that risk. Even that minute amount would be really useful to reduce it down. The advantage of also having this on, so having doors, things like that, and windows open, is it reduces touch points. Touch points is something that we need to think about. Where do people touch? We touch doors every time we open one. If that door is open, or if we've got doors that self-open, then we're reducing down that possibility of spreading. So it's something you need to think about. I know, again, fire regulations, fire doors come into this a lot, but certainly you can get ones where you get things installed which reduce, as soon as the fire alarm goes off, it closes the doors, so self-closers like that. Look at installing things like that. Again, it's a nice, easy way of reducing down risk without actually changing what we do. We just open the door. That's the only thing that we've done. We may well need to look at lifts and reduce down the lifts, which kind of brings us on to something else here that they keep saying about, which is health and fitness being such a big thing about reducing it down. So encourage people to take the stairs. Make it something into the business that you are encouraging people to take the stairs. We're not saying don't use them. Lifts are extremely important, especially for people with limited mobility. But maybe we could restrict it to those people only. That reduces down those touch points and those places where people are likely to congregate. Again, what we must do is we must advertise this. We must make sure people know what we're doing. And that's probably more key than any part of this and any part of risk assessment. When we're talking about risk assessments and doing one, I often get asked, how long should a risk assessment be? Well, personally, I'm going to say keep it down to a couple of pages. Don't do one of these which are 20 or 30 pages long, because you'll waffle through. You'll talk about a load of stuff which you didn't really need to talk about. And the main problem was nobody will look at it. It needs to be looked at. What you're doing here is an idea of what people need to do to help themselves. So keep those risk assessments short. Keep them brief. First of all, we talk about, okay, what is the problem? we identify the problem. I've said this before, we identify the problem, we talk about what the problem is. The second bit we do is what they can do to help. Some of this will be you'll need to market a lot of these things. You'll need to tell people what to do. You'll need to show people what you need to do. And one of the best ways of doing this is probably going to be hygiene and cleaning. Hygiene and cleaning is something we're going to need to look at. So we'll probably need to step up cleaning rotas and inspections. We'll need to look at the touch points that I mentioned previously, and we'll need to identify these and see how we can either reduce down those interactions, as I've said before, number one. Secondly, is reduce down the ability for the virus to spread on these. This will realistically be more cleaning of those places. We need to make sure that's nice and visible, because that's what's going to reassure people. And when we start talking about getting customers and start talking about getting staff back into the business, they're not sure that things are being helped a return. So we need to make it nice and visible. Like I said, try and make sure that these are staggered in terms of time. So cleaning takes place out of hours. But some things will need to be done regularly through the day. So you might want to establish a cleaning rota for your staff. So this might be where, a bit like when you go into some of these restaurants and they have when the toilets were last inspected. Well, why don't you get people on board by getting them to do it themselves, getting them to help out? And this could be with cleaning stations. So you might have a cleaning station in by the door, so say, please wipe your hands. You know, the gel on entrance and egress points where you can say, look, just hand gel before you come in. That would be great. Get people on board and doing it. It doesn't necessarily need to be increasing your cleaning in terms of having to pay extra here. We just need to increase what we do. We need to look at the areas we do. We need to make sure people are aware of what it is and the reasons why we're doing it. So a bit like, as I say, the toilets have those inspection rotas of when things were last inspected. Put that up on the wall. This was when when desks were last cleaned. This is when stairs were last cleaned. Yeah, a little tick sheet. You can make sure it's done, and you've got a good system in place when we start talking about enforcement. But more importantly, people are confident to go, yeah, it wasn't that long ago. Things were done. So we need to step that up. As I said, let's look at staff and customer interactions. I'm afraid things are going to change. Like we said, those open plan offices are going to start to change, but equally front of house are going to start to change. I'm personally not a huge fan of going to have the reception areas with big glass screens, a bit like you have in the banks, because I think that looks a bit intimidating. I'm sure a lot of you aren't that keen on that idea either. Equally, walking in, your receptionist is wearing a mask is not, I think, is in the same sort of vein, not ideal. So maybe we need to look at how we're going to do that. So if you're an office block with a front of house or reception area, maybe we can remove the reception area totally. And I think that possibly would have a bigger impact. It certainly would have a bigger impact in terms of you reduced the contact there. You haven't got somebody face to face, but equally, I think it's a lot more acceptable and a good time to look at those sort of things and how those front of house staff may manage inquiries and reduce down those interactions. Equally, you may need to put front of house staff in place, especially if you're a shop or retail establishment, because you need to explain to customers what they're doing. A lot of this can be done with signage. Signage is going to be a key aspect to here, but also social media, social marketing policy. but you may well need somebody to manage this. So I've spoke briefly about reducing down your front of house. If you've got a reception area, it's a great way of reducing down that risk. But equally, you may need to put something in place if you've got clients coming in and that, to make sure that they do things right, to assist customers, making sure those cleaning stations are topped up. So if you're a shop, what do we need to do? Well, we are going to have some sort of cleaning stations at the entrances to any of your shops, to make sure people are keeping things like trolleys clean, baskets clean, things like that. I'm sure most of you will have been to your Tesco's, your Sainsbury's, something like that, and seen what they do. Basically, it's reciprocating that on a smaller scale. That is, if we can't reduce down people coming into the shop, we're still making the sales. Which, like I said before, people are moving online. Think about your business. And this is going to be a business change as much as anything else. I think one of the things here is going to be, again, about that reassurance of clients and making sure they know what to do before they even get there. And I'm going to kind of mention social media here. And this works equally as well for staff. But one of the things I am going to say, I'm sure Jill will say this as well, you need to communicate to staff in a slightly different manner, but you need to make sure communication is done. Social media, I think, is extremely important. And if you're looking at setting up again, if you're looking at making changes, telling people what you're doing and how they need to react will make them more likely to come, will make them more confident. People are always scared of the unknown. It's human nature. We're always scared of the unknown. So getting rid of that unknown is what we need to do. So giving clear instructions. Put a section on your website about, like, what do I do when I attend? And this goes, I'm going to say this is for shops as well as industry. If you're in industry and you've got somebody visiting, put on where they need to go, what they need to do, who they need to speak to. If it's a shop, even more important. I went and got myself a takeaway the other week, and one of the things that has stopped me getting a takeaway was from this particular place was I wasn't quite sure how they're operating. How do I pick it up? They've said they put measures in place, but they didn't actually say what they were. And it wasn't until a friend of mine had been and picked something up. He said, "Oh no, all you do is you go around and they've got the front door open and your takeaway will be there on a table in front of you." So, okay, I'll go and do that now. But I put it off for a week or so because I was like, I looked at their website, it's like, we're doing takeaways and we've got measures in place to protect you. But what are they? Oh no, I'm not going to bother. Too much hard work. So communicate that one. Social media keeps things up to date. Videos. Yeah, pictures. They say a picture tells 1,000 words, so a video is 30 frames a second. So put those on. Make the most of it. Utilize that. And that's how you're going to get slightly ahead of the curve in terms of your customers, in terms of your clients, in terms of your competitors. And if people are confident, people don't have that unknown, and they know what you're doing, then that's the most important part. So it doesn't matter, even if you're showing pictures of, here's our new office. We've changed the office round. That's a good thing to share. Even though your customers, aren't so worried about that. They've got that confidence that you're thinking about it. You're proactive. People want to speak to a proactive company. We are going to have to increase signage. And I put barriers in this one as well, because I'm kind of moving on to that PPE aspect here. Make sure it's clear. I'm going to kind of mention the what the government made in terms of their signage, in terms of their what they said early on. Their first thing was stay home, stay safe, reduce the spread. That's what it was. Stay home, stay safe, reduce the spread. Well, you can't misinterpret that. You can't really get that wrong. It's stay home or what? stay home. That's the option. Yeah, it's stay alert now. What does that mean? Well, that's a deliberate on their part. I'm sure it is, because it kind of leaves things open for a lot of people to say, well, what does that mean? Well, I can do this and I can do that, and it kind of allows people to push the boundaries a bit. Whereas stay home, that's it. It's black or white, you know. And that's the thing with your signage and barriers. Clear signage. It needs to be that black and white, stay home sort of message. I'm not saying stay home because that doesn't work anymore. But what I'm saying is make sure it's clear. 2 meters, stay home. Yeah, that's the same thing. 2 meters is 2 meters. You can't change that. So, you know, make sure that's the set. Stand here. Stop there. People do as they're told. How many of you turned up and were waiting at exactly 2 o'clock today? Well, you did that because you were told to do that. Nobody's made you do it. You were told to do that. Who stops at red lights? You were told to do that. You do it. Yeah, most of the time there's nobody stopping you. It's just that, well, that's what I've got to do. That's how we know it works. So make sure signage is clear. Clear to the point that anybody can understand it. And in actual fact, I'm going to say here, Yorkshire Parks did a really quite a good one in terms of the 2 meter rule and what 2 meters actually means. If anybody wants to look it up, I'll have a look at the Yorkshire Parks posters that they've done. It's like 2 sheep or 1 Land Rover. That's their way. It's in layman's terms, because I know a lot of people can't tell what 2 meters are. I've got to say, I would struggle with 2 meters. 6'6", probably that. So make sure it's nice and clear. Make sure it's in visible places. It's in the right place, so people again are confident before. Again, this is where put this on social media. Show them what you're doing. Show those pictures. Show where it is, and it helps people understand. This needs to continue throughout the store. It's not just on the front of it. Throughout your industry. Make sure it's clear where people move. So arrows, people follow arrows. Exit, egress. Yeah, keep things exit, entrance. You know, that's the wording we need to use. Make sure it's nice and clear. Remind people the reason you're doing this one. Yeah, you're not doing it to be a really pig-headed person. You're doing this to help them. You're doing this to keep them safe. If they feel that they're doing it to keep themselves safe, then they're more likely to do it. As a last resort, we want to be putting up physical barriers. But we may need to put up physical barriers, whether they're temporary or whether they're more permanent. And I'm afraid we're going to have to be starting to look at those semi-permanent sort of things. So you may need to think about putting in barriers to aid flow. I'm going to say aid flow around the shop. I say shop because it's the best example here. Really, what I'd be doing is not putting in barriers myself. I'd be moving around shelving. I'd be moving around the stalls so that people move around in the way that you want them to. I wouldn't be putting in offers in entrances and doorways, because if you start doing that, that's where people stop. And then you get that choke point. So we need to have that free-flowing ability. But I would possibly be putting them staggered throughout the shop so that people move nicely and blocking off certain ends with certain offers and things like that so that people will move in a certain direction. If you're in an office, you might have an upstairs and a downstairs, so people go up one way and down the other. You might have to make communication a bit better so that people know when people are approaching and can say, look, you know, the right of way is downstairs. If you're halfway up and I'm starting to go down, then I'm afraid you've got to give way. So have that sort of give way system so people are clear about what they're doing. You kind of don't want to leave it up to people to make that decision. It needs to be fairly clear. As I said at the end, I've put here again, and I've put this on every single site because I can't put this enough, is advertise what you're doing. I would even share, if we're talking about risk assessments, share those risk assessments, send them out to your employees so that they know this is what you're doing and this is the reasons why you're doing it. Okay. One of the things, as I say, I haven't mentioned, actually, I'll go back to, because it's something that's in the news a lot, is these sort of protective barriers at tills and stuff like that. Those, I'm going to say, are much more preferable to anything in terms of personal protective equipment. Barriers are sort of, I'm going to say, the second level. First one is reduce it down. Second one is put those barriers up. And the third one we're talking about is personal protective equipment. Really, we shouldn't need any personal protective equipment for anybody, apart from the very small few of people who really can't change any work processes and are at high risk. So a few frequently asked questions I want to go through. These are things I've been asked in a previous workshop that I delivered. First of all was, our workspace is going to become unusable? I'm going to say no, I don't think that that's going to be the case. I think for some people it's going to cause a lot of challenges. I will admit that. But I think we can make these fairly usable spaces. I think we're going to see a change in offices going from the modern open plan hot desk in office a bit more back to what we used to see in kind of the 1970s and 1980s with everybody in those sort of pods. Hopefully we can make it a little bit nicer than that with kind of clear screens and stuff like that rather than the old pinboard sort of things. But hopefully office blocks industry is still going to be usable. We've moved on a lot in terms of technology and we need to increase that use of technology. I'm sure a lot of you have been working from home and I had staff who are working from home. How's that gone? What do you think of that? It's been better or worse than you thought? Well, maybe if we invest in a little bit more in terms of the working from home technology or our staff in terms of mentoring and working from home, that again, when schools go back and stuff like that, maybe it's a viable option. Maybe these workplaces, which were you're thinking is going to be unusable by having all these people in and having to put barriers up all the time, is suddenly become not needed. So I think the changes that are there, the technology that are there, is there to help us and keep these places sort of usable. PPE and masks. This is a big thing now. So what is the government guidance? Well, the government guidance has said about wearing masks on public transport and in areas where you're enclosed. What it actually says is face coverings. So for people on public transport, it says face coverings. There's a very key reason for that one, because face coverings are not classed as PPE. It's there to protect others. It's not there to protect you, it's there to protect others. So if you've got the virus, it stops it from being put out into the atmosphere or reduces it down by wearing this face covering. Will you need to get your staff to wear face coverings? Avoid it at all costs. A, it's expensive. It will become part of PPE, so you need to be careful of what regulations there are and whether you need it to be regulated. Secondly, well, thirdly, I'm going to say here, you're going to struggle to get hold of it. It's not easy to get hold of because there's going to be a huge demand for this one. But more importantly, it can actually be detrimental and more risky to the people wearing it. If you think about it, it's uncomfortable, it's going to slow work rates down, it's not going to be, people aren't going to interact as well because you're losing that facial expressions. And most importantly, if you've got somebody who's already got breathing issues, breathing through a mask, if they're not used to it, may well cause problems. So you may actually be increasing the risk by adding masks into the situation. So it is a case of avoid that if at all you can. I'd probably always allow the option to wear those. But if people want to wear their own face coverings, if they feel that that's the case, then that's again reassuring that they're allowed to do that. But to enforce that in, I think is avoided all costs. And in nowhere in all the documents that I've seen does it say that you must wear face masks. It says you may need to assess the risk and they may be required in certain situations, but there is no definitely you need to wear it. Okay, so it's always a last resort. Will I need to increase cleaning and employing professional cleaners? Yes, you will definitely need to increase your cleaning. Even if that's just to reassure people, you might have a really clean business, which is really good, gets cleaned every day. Well, make it a bit more visible then. You know, that's the key point here. But you will probably need to increase your cleaning regime. Will I need to employ professional cleaners? No, not necessarily. If you can do it in-house and you can show how you're doing it in-house, then that's not a problem at all. You can do it yourself. It's not a case of I have to get people in to do it. But again, it might be a marketing issue. It might be something you need to think about from a marketing point of view. And I'm afraid a lot of this will boil down to marketing, not down to anything else. Do you need to get professional risk assessment done? No, and I would actually encourage you to do your own. If anybody does want support in that one, I'm sure there's the support through the Growth Hub, and I'm more than happy to talk to people about risk assessments, how to do them. We get a clipboard out, walk around the premises and say, well, okay, let's think about how people go. Let's think about the day-to-day activities. Let's make a list of them. Oh, hang on a minute. They go make a cup of coffee. We've got a shared kitchen. What are we going to do here? Yeah, think about these things. You don't need somebody to do one who's a professional to do one for you. So do it yourself. Do it yourself. They're going to know about the business. Nobody else is. Only you are going to know about the business. Who's going to enforce this and what enforcement measures are there going to be? We've heard about big fines and that. Well, there are two enforcing bodies here. HSE, if you're high risk. So this is things like building, so any construction is classed as high risk. Manufacturing high risk is HSE, but most people will be done by the local councils, and enforcement will be exactly the same. As I say, none of that's changed. Health and Safety at Work Act hasn't changed at all. You still need to do it in the same way. You will be required to keep a log of all of this, and your risk assessment, as I say, is a key part of this. Write it down, keep the measures clear, and make a nice list and show how you've communicated it to people. At very least, send an email to everybody and say, look, here we go, this is what it is, that's what we need to do. I would also suggest you have regular team meetings with the people to talk about, well, this is what we're going to do, what have you found, how have you found this? Let's keep it updated. It's not a document that should never be updated, and you're going to need to update this, I'm going to say, at least weekly at the moment, as things change, as people change. Okay, so your enforcing bodies will not change at all. Will there be inspections done? Yes, there will. There will definitely be inspections done, but really the people who are going to be inspecting you are going to be your employees and your customers. Those are the people who come back and say, yes, do that, will do that not. Will there be whistleblowers? Yes, there will. I'm sure there will be people. But again, I actually kind of going to bring back to social media here, is most of the enforcement probably is going to be done via that, I reckon, these days. You know, that's how things are. Bad review. You know, somebody moaning about something, that's what you need to think about. So enforcement's the same, but I don't think it's going to change too much to what it was previously. My premises is old, so I can't do one-way systems and things like that. Well, look at other measures. As I say, this is where you might need to stagger working times. You might need to look at communication in terms of the team about when they need to leave, come in, go upstairs, come downstairs, that sort of thing. Look at working from home, look at working remotely. That is still a very good option. It's still a very good option. And the final one I said is, do masks have to be certified? Now, I don't really want to open a can of worms here, because that one really is a can of worms of what certification there is. If it is PPE, it will have to have some sort of certification. Depending on what the reason is they're wearing the mask, is what the certification will have to be. As I said, avoid it at all costs, because you don't really want to be getting into this one. You don't really want to be getting into this one. A few other ones that have come up in the last sort of couple of days is about uniforms. What about uniforms? Well, one of the things they're saying is wash clothes more regularly. The virus can stay up to 72 hours, they reckon, on clothes. So I think we're going to be seeing more uniforms coming back into place. So you may need to look at increasing the amount of uniform that your staff have, you know, so that they can wash them more regularly, so they can change them more regularly. I personally have always been a huge fan of bringing in some sort of uniform. It keeps things nice and tidy, but it also therefore allows you to keep that changeover nice and tidy, in terms of making sure that people have the right equipment, the right clothing. Yes, that is kind of PPE. There is that sort of grey area, but I think we're going to start seeing more of that coming in, so that people can change in and out of workwear. That also therefore brings me on to the point about changing, and if you've got people having to change at work, and those sort of facilities, we may need to start looking at whether those facilities are going to be closed. So this might be changing rooms, might be shower rooms, things like that. You need to start looking at whether those are areas that could become an issue. So if there is an area like that, which is a communal area, that may well be off limits for the moment, and you may need to look at that, which might therefore bring into more changes have to be made, timings have to be changed, because those are going to be choke points. Equally, if you've got customer toilets and stuff like that, unless you're able to show that you are keeping those immaculately clean and got things in place there, you will probably have to reduce or remove those from use. For some people, you can't remove those from use. I do understand that. So you might need to again look at having to have key systems, opening systems, things like that. But again, think about this: key systems. That key moving from person to person all the time. Is that good? Is there some things you need to put in place? Maybe key cards, stuff like that. I think we are going to see a reduction in cash. Certainly most places that I see now opening up is card only. I personally would rather use card only, and again, looking from a customer's point of view, it's easier for a start. Most people are now getting much more acceptance to that one, so you do need to look at whether that's a point that you can bring in. Again, brings you on to keypads and card machines. How are they going to be kept clean? If you're a shop, then it could be quite nice and easy. You know, the till, person at the till, after every person wipes down that card machine, you know, a pack of sort of Dettol wipes would do that sort of very nicely. I personally think we can be a little bit more eco than using wipes and things like that all the time. I'm a huge fan of being ecologically supportive here, and we need to build that into what we're going to do. Think about the ecological aspects of all of this as well. But I think encouraging people to pre-place orders, encouraging people to pay online, and having those systems in place is going to be important for everyone. Look at your systems like that, see how they can manage, train your staff. Your staff will need to be trained to make sure they're aware of what they can do. There are some great systems. If you're a small business, there's some really good systems from people like iZettle and stuff like that, where you pay for the machine and then you pay a larger percentage than the rental machines. So every business can have a contactless card payment machine. There's no excuses these days for it. The extra costs you can't put on the bill. We know that last year that was taken away, that you can't add credit card costs and stuff like that onto bills if it's to the Joe, I'm going to say Joe Public. If the business is slightly differently, but to Joe Public, you can't add on any costs. So you may need to build that in. You may need to think about what those additional costs you're going to see are. Cash flow is going to be extremely important here, because at the end of the day, we have quite a change to our working life. We have quite a change to our systems, the biggest upheaval we've had for many years. So revisit that cash flow forecast. Do a nice straightforward one to show how these changes are going to make a difference. Increased marketing you might have to do, increased signage you're going to have to do, and look at what measures you may have to, and I say change and adapt so that you can keep the costs as low as possible. This is where, like I was saying, if we're paying 2% for card transactions, we're going only card transactions now, we're not taking any cash. Well, our costs have just gone up by 2%. So we need to build that into it. So don't forget about that. A lot of the times I think we're going to see issues now are going to be not when things start opening up again. I think we're going to see this nice little boom when people start opening up again. But 6 months when people miss all these costs that they've suddenly implemented, and they haven't worked on their cash flow going forward. So look at what support's available long term as well as short term going forward. I would love to see that everybody starts publishing their risk assessments, stick them up on the wall. I think it's important that people see what you're doing, be confident with what you're doing. And from a staff point of view and from a customer point of view, it gives reassurance. It gives reassurance. Final thing I'm going to mention here is people getting to and from work is also something you need to establish. You need to look at this. You need to look at the way that people get to and from work, and how the best way for that to happen is. Although that is not part of your in-house risk assessment, something that I'm not really talking about today, it is still something that is part of the risk assessment. It is still something that is part of your business. So maybe have a look at encouraging people to use less public transport, encouraging people to use less less car sharing, things like that. Maybe encourage people to bike more, stick some bike racks in. Those sort of things will help reduce down those interactions and keep this nice R level as low as possible. So at the end of the day, although a lot of this is how does it affect my business? What do I have to do? You've got to also think about what do we need to do in terms of us as a community and trying to encourage the health and the well-being of our staff and our customers, and I'm going to say the world as a whole. So don't lose sight of that as much as when we start thinking about this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do, this is a tick list of things. Think about the whole rules. Think about the whole rules. From my point of view, as I say, the key thing I'm going to say here is the marketing. And I'm conscious that I've kind of mentioned this many a time, that we need to keep the marketing up. We need people to know about it, and that people have a right to work and shop in a safe place. So tell them how that's going to work. As I say, I would love to see everybody's risk assessment and a nice big plaque on the wall. I know that's not likely to happen, but I think it'd be good practice and it's a great way of communicating. So make sure you do that communication. Always advertise what you do. Always make sure things are viable. Always make sure things are visible, and never hide anything back. Always show reasoning why. Lead from the front. If you're not prepared to do it, why would your customers, your employees want to do that. Okay, I'm now, you've heard from me for quite a while now. I'm now going to pass you on to Jill, who will be talking about HR and the key considerations in terms of that. I encourage any questions, stick them in the chat area, and we'll come back to them at the end. So Jill, I'll pass you on. Hopefully,
okay.
technology will do that.
Yeah, so hang on, I'm just working on the technical side, which is great. So can you see my screen, hopefully? Okay, so well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Peter, for a really insightful and informative presentation there on social distancing. I think who'd have thought that when we were sat there at Christmas having our turkey, that we would be sitting here talking about social distancing, self-isolating, and furloughs. So we find ourselves in a very strange situation, which is daily changing, and with that, it brings a lot of pressure for organisations to think about their safety and health and well-being of their people. So all the practical safety side is one big area that everybody's looking at, but also we've got our employees to think about, who are kind of, I would say, at the heart of everything that we do. And it's going to be absolutely critical that we handle, and what we do in the next few weeks, I think, will be looked at for a long time, because people are coming back to work under, circumstances they've never experienced before, and have a lot of fear around our, unseen imposter, which is the virus that is circulating. So we are in uncharted waters, I'd say, from a HR perspective, which we, are working through, and obviously want to support organisations to kind of make sense of. So I just, first of all, and can everybody see that my screen? Has it worked? The technology? Can you see that slide? Extended job retention scheme. Hopefully. So working through where we're at, really, the current situation. The government have extended the job retention scheme guidance. They've extended the scheme till the end of October. I just thought it'd be worth checking in on this, because obviously a lot of you may have employees who are actually on furlough at the moment. Everything remains the same, so everybody is getting, who's on furlough, is getting the 80% up to £2,500, and that will stay the same until the end of July. However, from the beginning of August, we will be asked as employers to take on a percentage of the salary towards your employees, because the government will pay the rest. Now, we don't actually know what that will look like. Those details will be released at the end of May. So, you've kind of got 1 month where it's the same. From August, it's going to be a bit different, and you will need to consider who you want to stay on furlough, who you would need to bring back to work. And so, there's a lot of thinking, I guess, that's going to have to, and planning that's going to have to take place on top of everything else that you're doing from a safety perspective. There's also all of this planning to do in terms of how we're going to, get people back to work, who's coming back, how do we make those decisions. So I'm going to kind of touch on some of those areas today. So I guess some of the factors to consider before reopening. This is something that people are very concerned about. So, they're hesitant, I would say, in terms of coming back to work. I mean, that's not everybody, we have to say. you know, on the news we've seen over the last week or so, people are actually enjoying getting back to work. You know, we do like interaction, we like to see people, and we want to, you know, get back to the normality that we had to some degree that we had before. So, you know, in some people it won't be a challenge. They'll be keen to sort of look at how do I get back to work, but for many, they're dealing with a lot of things, and as you'll know yourselves, I'm sure a lot of you are dealing with these things. You know, we've often got children at home. The schools that still remain shut at the moment. I know they're trying to work on reopening some of the schools with some of the years that can go to school. However, we're still going to have a lot of people who are, you know, having to consider childcare. And although, you know, childcare, we're not responsible for childcare as employers, there is a responsibility here in terms of people are worried and concerned about how this is going to work. You know, having their children at home all the time is a challenge. So we've also got people who are shielding, self-isolating, and for various different reasons and at different levels. So we've got to consider that. We also have, you know, to think about who can we keep at home. You know, it has been a time where we kind of, everybody is at home working on technology. Hopefully it's working most of the time, but that's en masse, and it, you know, we're now at a point where we have to consider, is the job working at home? Some people's jobs haven't been able to work at home and therefore they're furloughed, you know, so there's quite a lot to be thinking about. And I'd say, you know, there are a lot of options to consider here. Now, Peter touched on some of these. We are in a period of having to think creatively, I guess, in terms of what we do with our employees, and be very flexible in terms of how we look at all options. Maybe a lot more than we've ever done before, and I think you'll have to really sit down and work this through. And, you know, don't rush to bring everybody back, is what I'd say. You know, there's a chance to take a more staggered approach, and you know, ensure that everybody is feeling safe and able to come back to work. The other, you know, sad output, I guess, from this is that some businesses are looking at, can they, you know, viably continue? Is the business at risk? And, you know, having to consider whether after the furlough scheme ends, they may have to lay people off or consider short-time working, reduced hours. And these things can help you avoid redundancies, because ultimately, if you can't do that, then you may end up in a redundancy situation. So again, there's a lot of things to take into consideration from a statutory perspective when thinking about either layoff, short-time or redundancies. And the other thing is to really, you know, there are a lot of things to support, I suppose, from a flexible working perspective, and from some of these statutory rights around time off for dependents, which you can utilise. You know, that is down to the discretion of the employer, so you can sort of use those things, as with parental leave. That is unpaid, but again, you can look at what you could do in relation to that. And annual leave obviously is paid, so because people haven't been able to take holidays at the moment, obviously they can carry them over now, which is a piece that the government has changed. But they're the sort of things that you can start thinking around and start utilising and start trying to find solutions for people. So moving on to, you know, kind of engaging, I guess, with the your employees. This is a kind of fundamental part, and I know Peter mentioned it, in terms of communicating, you know, what are you doing and what measures are you taking. I think even on furlough, we should be in contact with everyone who's on furlough. Whilst they're not doing any work for you, they certainly need to be up to date with what's happening with the organisation. They need to be up to date with the measures that you're going to take from a health and safety perspective. They need to feel that they can kind of offer some ideas and be involved. So it's very much about being very inclusive with people. I would say that you need to sort of involve any trade unions, or well, you do definitely need to involve trade unions and employee reps if you have them. You may not, but you've also got your health and safety reps, and everybody is kind of here to get involved and to partner you to sort of help move this forward. So they can be very play a pivotal part in talking to people and help get the message out and get the guidance out there. I think people need to understand, we've had some great people, employers talking about, thinking about trying to engage back in with the workforce, bringing new ideas in, how do we get them to sort of understand what we've been doing. Peter mentioned, get out on social media, within your intranet and all that good stuff. But I guess the key thing is that face-to-face conversation with people. We don't know, or you may not know exactly what's going on for people. A lot of people are feeling anxious, and we know that. And you've got people who are extremely vulnerable, so there's no chance that they will be able to come back to work. They've got to shield, keep themselves safe. The vulnerable category, which also involves pregnant ladies, so think about what you're going to do in respect of ladies who are pregnant and might be furloughed at the moment, or what measures do you need to put in place for them. And actually, where you possibly can, you should really let them stay at home, because they are in that vulnerable group. So, it's, I think, engaging, and sort of now is the time to sort of get into those conversations, to really get into, how have you been, what have you been doing, what can we do, how are you feeling about work, how are you feeling about the safety element, the virus, and also, as Peter mentioned as well, the travelling to work piece, because it is important, and there may be different options that we can offer in terms of helping with, we might be able to extend car parks and more car parks can turn up, and I think that will help inform your planning process, because if you know that there are people that are really scared, is the word, and don't want to get on a bus or something like that, or a tube or train, whatever it might be, it's thinking about, what can we do? Is that a person who then will have to stay at home, or is there something that as an organisation we can help them do? Again, we've as employers never been fully responsible for people getting to work. However, we have got this duty of care, and in these completely unknown circumstances and difficult circumstances, really, I think we need to do things a bit differently. So it's really looking at every which way that you can support with everyone that's involved. And there's a good little phrase here: communicate, consult and confirm. And I think that Peter mentioned that from a safety perspective, clear communication in terms of what you're doing, how you're doing it, your risk assessments, all that good stuff. It's being open and transparent with people. We're all in it together, and anything you do, you just need to confirm that so people understand they've got clear expectations around it, what part they play in it, and what it's going to feel like when they get back to work. So this is something that the Chartered Institute for Personal Development, so CIPD we call it, which is our HR professional body. They've been very involved in all the government discussions and things in terms of supporting employers, and obviously we can tap into this information that they provide, and there's lots of great tools and things like that we utilize. But this is quite a simple framework that they have come up with, and they call it the 3 tests, and it's quite a good planning tool for you to just kind of think around when you're starting to engage with your workforce. You're starting to get them to consider, what they could do, how they feel about it, and it's just the 3 questions, which I think are pretty easy to follow. So your first question is it easy? Is it essential? So do they do a role that is essential, that they actually need to be at work? So whether that's in an office, on site, whatever that might look like for you, or can they stay at home and must continue to do so. So it's those 2 things that you're kind of considering, and then if they do need to come into the office, this is where you can start to think about what flexible working practices can we offer. So they might be able to do staggered hours, you might be able to alternate days for teams, you might be able to offer come in for 2 days, work at home for 3. There's so many different options that when you start to really get into this. And also if you talk to your employees, they're the best people to tell you, this is my role, this is the responsibilities I have, it's worked okay at home, or these are the bits I can't do. So you can start to sort of look at and really work through what it could look like for your employees. Is it safe? So again, we've mentioned you've got that duty of care and to manage and identify and manage those risks and make it COVID secure, as Peter's talked through. But also that does involve mental health and well-being, which I'm going to come on to in a moment, which is quite prevalent at the minute from what we understand, and needs some careful consideration at this sort of time that we're all working with. And the other question there is it mutually agreed? So it's vital that you get that clear dialogue, and whatever you do in terms of making changes to people's roles or hours or whatever it might be, should always be mutually agreed. And if it is agreed, even if it's a short-term change, you really need to consider, I'll put it in writing and confirm it. So again, we go back to that, let's communicate, talk to each other, let's consult and really get some good ideas and things going on, and then let's confirm that this is how you're going to do it, this is what you're going to be, the hours you're working, etc. It does need agreement, because you get into contractual variations from a legal perspective, and we aren't able to just do those unless there's something written into a contract that allows us to do it. So you do need to be aware of what your contracts say, and also then think about what do we need to do. Collaborate, so I've said, I think there's a great opportunity to sort of get really involved with everyone, be open, be transparent, and get everyone to discuss and agree what they believe can work best. And sometimes they come up with some great ideas that we maybe haven't even considered. So You know, people are looking at ways of doing things differently. There's been lots of things on the news, and employers, you know, where they make gin and then suddenly they're making hand sanitizers, and people are being very innovative in terms of businesses. You know, some people are dealing with knowing that they're going to, big corporate companies are already looking at redundancies. You'll have heard of lots of those, but you know, there are examples where they've been handled extremely well in terms of how they've been communicated to the employees, and it makes such a big difference when you're dealing with something that's got a massive impact on you as an individual and you as businesses, but also your employees. This is huge if you get into those sort of conversations. So I guess, you know, it's just a little simple framework that I thought might be useful for you to start thinking through, because you are going to have to start thinking very carefully now, because if you are in a position where, and hopefully not, we don't want to be in positions of layoffs and short-term redundancies, but if you are getting to that thinking, then you need to be considering the consultation periods that have to take place during those times, during this time before we reach the end of the furlough scheme. So, you know, it's a time of sitting down and planning what you need to do as a business. So I mentioned mental health and well-being. It is Mental Health Awareness Week. So it's there's an awful lot of things on the news and everywhere around this, and it is very apt, I suppose, and prevalent at the moment, as I mentioned. There's all sorts of polls and things going on about people. Opinion in April, they concluded that almost half of the adults that they surveyed, that was 47% of the UK adults, said their mental health had been affected by the coronavirus. So we don't know, you know, to what level, but that's, you know, nearly 50% of people that have, one way or another, are dealing with some mental health issues, and to what degree we kind of don't know, and only you can know that by talking to the people who work for you. But it will be for lots of different reasons. You know, it could be finance, it could be the pressures of working at home with everybody in the room. You know, it's not the norm, and it could be, you know, they are just really concerned about this virus, and that is having a massive impact on those people. So we've got to get underneath some of that and really understand what's going on for our own employees. And I suppose, you know, it was quite, there was no planning on this kind of forced mass working from home and everybody down tools and you must stay at home. It had a massive impact. If you think of, you know, when people go through change and there's sort of different stages everyone goes through, this was overnight. You know, it was incredible in terms of everybody was kind of reeling from, what are we going to do, what is happening, how can it be that we're, you know, not allowed out? And, you know, we'd all seen it, China, sort of things happening on TV with them, and thinking, oh my God, you know, this can't happen to us, and actually found ourselves in that position. So it is a big impact scenario, this, so it will have affected people in different ways. And I think you get into that, you've got to sort of get to know your teams in a very individual way and really understand, you know, what is going on for them, and that stay connected, you know, communicate, encourage people to talk. You hear that a lot in terms of mental health and well-being, and be sure they don't feel isolated. I think that is something that people have felt at home. It's great, you know, you hope for it, I think, working from home when you're commuting up and down the, you know, M62, wherever it is. But actually, you know, when it's forced on you and there's no planning and we don't know if it's going to be effective and people are struggling to get technology working, they haven't got the equipment, you know, all those things add to your pressures, add to your how you feel. And therefore, it will still be there, and they're still kind of coming to terms with what is happening, and how they can get back to normality. So think about, as we said, the vulnerable groups, those who've still looking after children, or anyone who they've got to care for. They might be caring for an elderly person who needs some help, and even a bereavement, which we obviously is the very sad side of this, but people are dealing with it, and that needs to be taken into consideration. So the other thing that is really interesting, and often we forget, is that we do expect a lot from line managers. I think they end up with everything to deal with, so they'll be coordinating and putting a lot in place for the safety side of it. They will be liaising with the teams. They'll also be in those conversations, and actually some of those situations are quite complex and very personal situations, and actually line managers are not skilled professionals in the health profession, mental health professionals, and therefore absolutely let's get them support, whether you can support internally or whether you can access some coaching, some training, whatever it might be, or even just other organisations that can offer a lot of support in terms of how to deal with some of these, or even your HR teams if you have them, but they can help you sort of think through what are we dealing with here, and how can we move forward, and give them some support as well. It's quite a tough job. So talk to people, as I've said, individually, and the other thing is really listen. I think it's about what are they actually telling me, and get underneath that, and also signpost to experts. So a lot of organisations have, the bigger organisations have the employee assistance programs. You may not have those, and depending on the size of the business, but there is a lot of support from the NHS. There are a lot of tools and resources out there that can help people, and actually just signposting people to those resources if needed, checking in to see how they're doing, and giving them just that support might make all the difference in terms of how they feel about getting back to work. And I'm sure you can allay some of the fears that might be going on for people. So and I thought I'd just kind of put a bit of a, so what might that first day at work look like? I think you need to treat it. People have been off work quite a period of time, so 6, 7, 8 weeks, and maybe by the time we get to the end of the furlough scheme, maybe a lot longer. So it's thinking about if they're going to come back into the office, and some of you may have brought people back and they're absolutely fine, but I think there's always a case for looking at it as your first day at work, basically. Obviously they know what they're doing from a job perspective, and they'll understand what the organisation did look like. However, that was when they were last there, and when they come back it's going to look very different. It's going to have some nice screens up potentially, or tape all over the floor, and you won't be able to go and make a coffee with your mate because he's you can't be within 2 meters of him, and all that stuff. So the workplace is not the same, and it's going to feel very different for people. So if you can start to reorientate them back into the workplace, ideas are around, you can even do a little mini induction or reorientation thing, take them around, show them what you've put in place, what it's like, or even beforehand. We heard from an employer who said they're probably going to take photographs and send them out to people, so they actually say, we can say this is what it looks like, this is what it's going to look like when you come back. All those good things, help people sort of feel, because as Peter said, if people understand what it is they're dealing with, they can make sense of it, so, and help them feel a bit more comfortable walking through that door. Again, I would try to hold one-to-one meetings to really, just see how they are, and how they feel about being back at work. So, you know, face to face is so much better. You can kind of see what people are feeling, even from body language, you know. So you can learn a lot more once you can see them, obviously 2 meters apart. But also, you know, you will still have people working from home, so ensure that you kind of run a virtual discussion or reorientation back into the office for them too. They also need to know what's happening with their colleagues, you know, because we all, you know, it's not just the actual site or office. It's not just about that. It's, you know, it's what are the colleagues doing, who's working, who's not. You know, what is different, how is the business doing as well, you know. Be transparent about how the business is doing and what you're facing is a really good way to kind of get people involved and on board. Confirm any adjustments, so, you know, if you've made any changes or job roles, you know, they should have been confirmed in writing anyway, but, you know, take them through what you discussed and what you have agreed. Your health and safety guidance, which we know needs to be clear, concise, and everybody understands it, and also their responsibility in that to keep people safe. So they need to ensure they don't go into the kitchen when somebody else is in there, etc., etc. So I think there's a lot that you can kind of build into this little mini reorientation induction. Some of it can go out prior, you know, in whatever form suits the business, and also ensure that you've kind of got people there on the first day it really is about settling people back in when they've been off for such a long time, just as you would do with anyone who'd been off for long-term illness or anything like that. And at the end of that day, I would, you know, see how people are feeling, whether they've had any concerns that have come up in the day. So what you've, you know, thought might work, maybe doesn't. So then you might want to make some adjustments, and then how you can support that with them. I've just put this in. It's a question that is coming up quite a lot from an employment law perspective, and heard it quite a lot in the last couple of weeks. What do we do if somebody refuses to return to work? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're in uncharted waters with some of the things that are going to come up here. Things that we've never dealt with before from an employment law perspective. We have no idea how tribunals will look at these things, the decisions we make now in a year's time or whenever it reaches that point. What we want to do is avoid that at all costs, really. We want to try and find solutions. So, you know, it is about that reassurance. You know, what is it that they're nervous about? If their role is essential for the office or the site or whatever premises you've got, then, you know, it's that, how much have you reassured them around the risk, as Peter said, you know, get as much out there as you can, have another conversation, what specific thing is that is concerning them. Take each case, you know, individually. Be sure to fully understand and consider everything before you make any decisions. I think you need to proceed with a lot of caution on this point before you move into any form of you know, procedure. Go through every scenario in terms of what is it that's bothering them and how you could compromise to reach a solution together. Again, move back to you know, can you arrange for them to take holidays or unpaid leave, anything that works. Sometimes it could just be fear that is getting in the way, and that could be, you know, again, back to the mental health underlying issues. So you need to work through this very carefully. I mean, you can, you know, obviously as an employer, you are able to go down that route if, you know, they will not come to work for and there is no valid reason why they will not. You've taken every reasonable step to keep them safe, you know, their health and well-being safe. You could go down that route, but as I said, I would take advice before you move into any formal action on this. Okay, and finally, just the last point for me was just be mindful of statutory and legal obligations. So you know, things have changed in the last few weeks in terms of the government has actually changed some law. So some of your policies and procedures may not be quite up to date. The holiday is an example of that, where we can now, you know, the 4 weeks can be carried over a 2-year period. So, you know, you just need to check back even if you've got staff handbooks, wherever that information is contained, you need to be sure that it's it's up to date. As I said, contract variations must be agreed, and, you know, make sure you involve, if you've got trade unions, employee reps, you know, consult with people, employees and their representatives, and make sure you've got, you know, the contract clauses that require, that the law requires for you to make things like layoffs and short-time working. As I said, be cautious. Just, you know, this is very unusual circumstances. It's not the norm. So all the employment lawyers are urging us to proceed with caution in terms of before we move to any of those formal procedures. And, you know, most of the employment law has not changed, so we do need to follow statutory procedures, you know, and be mindful of that, so that, you know, you've always demonstrated that you've followed a fair and reasonable process. So, you know, I mean, that's it from me in terms of what I'm going to cover today. I would say, you know, try to, there's a lot that are going on at the minute for employers. We're very conscious of that from a safety perspective, and for everything you've got to achieve with your teams to help them back to work. Try and share the positives too, you know, the good stuff that's happening. People are out there doing all sorts of things while they're furloughed, voluntary work, getting involved with the community. There's some great stuff out there, and the stories, you know, this is you know, going to go down in history, this stuff. In 2020, we all had this pandemic, and you know, there's some really nice stuff going on that people are involved in that will, you know, make up the story for your organisation, and hopefully help people feel, you know, normality is coming. We're going to get back to normal. So, you know, take it step by step. Okay, well, that's me. I'm going to hand over to questions now, I think.
Thank you very much, Jill, for that. So we've got a few questions coming in, so do put those in if you've got any questions. The first one which has come in is, I think, hopefully being answered in that sort of very end sort of slide about what happens if somebody doesn't want to come back to work. The only thing I'm going to add on here is, I think, again, a lot of this will come down to communication and sort of the reasons why people will not want to come back. And one of the things I mentioned is about compliance with government guidance. Like I said before, not to say that government guidance doesn't come into this one. It does come into this one. You need to follow government guidance. Definitely need to do that. But what I am going to say is a lot of this is going to be governed to what people feel. And you're going to may have to put things above and beyond what government guidance says to make people feel safe, to reassure people. So you may have to do things above and beyond that, and communicate that to your staff and your clients as well, to what that is. And that hopefully will reassure them. If it doesn't, then I dare say there's possibly something else there which you need to sort of look at as well. So yes, comply with government guidance, but you may want to go above and beyond that, and you may also want to communicate what the government guidance is. There are some really good sort of fact sheets they've now produced. There's sort of 7 sort of schemes about what you need to do, and there's nice little tick sheets on there. A lot of people say there's not much information on there, but that's partly because it's down to you and your risk assessments, and none of that's changed. But it does help you work through what the guidance is and make sure that you know you've covered it, and then you can communicate that further on. So that's hopefully that might answer that one. A question on air conditioning in offices and any advice on air conditioning. Something actually I didn't touch on. One of the first things to say here is a lot of offices have been closed down for a number of weeks, you know, a couple of months. Nobody may well have been into these offices. I do know that Legionnaires, for example, in water systems is something which we need to be very aware of, and that kind of brings on to air conditioning systems as well. Are they safe to operate in an office environment? Yes, as long as your risk assessment, and I always come back to that one, as long as your risk assessment says it is, which I see no reason why it would change, yes, they are safe. The government advice and all the scientific advice is basically saying fresh air is better, and that's always been the case. Certainly, I don't think that's ever changed. We've kind of moved to an air conditioning sort of society a little bit more, but fresh air is always preferable over air conditioning in any situation, always has been. Should they still be safe? Yes, they should still be safe. They shouldn't have changed in terms of that, but you may need to have them inspected. You may need to have these looked at because of the close down, because of the fact it's been closed for a number of times, and also going back to what we said before about making people aware of what you're doing and maybe giving that little bit extra to make people feel safe. So if you know that people are not feeling safe because, oh, it's a worry, and it's obviously a worry because you've picked up on it, work through that worry. Okay, let's have them tested, let's have them cleaned out so that people can show that works, and there's no issues there. So there should be no changes there, but I would suggest that everybody looks at their Legionnaires assessment here, and at very, very least nips in and runs the taps for a bit on the water systems and things like that. Next question is got, what advice do you have where social distancing cannot be maintained due to the task required 2 men in close proximity? Okay, so this is the one which realistically we will be probably ending up going down to PPE. Unfortunately, if we cannot eliminate the risk, if there is no way to eliminate the risk, we will have to put measures in place to reduce the risk. And that's the key thing. You find out the risk. What is the risk? We then, if we cannot reduce it, we have to put measures in place. This is unfortunately where PPE is going to come in and going to be needed. So if there is no way that these people cannot be kept apart, and that they will be working in close proximity, and there's no sort of screens that can be put up, no way of separating it out. So the one I'm thinking about here will be working in vehicles where there's 2 men sort of delivering or something like that, and there's no way of separating that. You may have to resort to PPE. There are certain things you can do: ventilate the room, ventilate the vehicle, that sort of thing. Again, that will help the spread of it. Look at other aspects where you can reduce down any interaction that these people will have with other people. Again, reducing it down. So looking at sort of break times and things like that. So again, what you're doing is you're reducing the transmission onto other people as well. There might be that sort of group. It's a bit like you being at home with your family. There's interaction between that group, but because you're not going out and seeing anybody, then that kind of almost stops and blankets and puts a barrier in there. So from that point of view, you might need to segregate teams. You might need to look at segregating teams, keeping those teams separately, especially if they can't isolate. But I'm afraid PPE might be something you have to look at in that situation. We've got another one on air conditioning. Hopefully I've answered that one. Next one is, what about customers coming into the shop wearing gloves where they have been shopping in other stores and use the same pair of gloves? Yeah, I mean, this is a classic one that I think where there's misinformation in terms of what people do. So you've got people wearing gloves all the time because it's kind of protected. They feel it's protecting them, when realistically gloves are to stop transmission. So they should be changed at every aspect. And if people aren't changing them, then it has no effect whatsoever. But I think the thing to think about here is what effect it has. It has no effect. So it's no different to somebody walking in without gloves on into your shop who's been to other shops. The situation is exactly the same. So they should be treated in exactly the same way. They may feel more confident because they're wearing gloves, but realistically, it doesn't change at all. You're not going to be able to enforce people to wash hands as they enter your store. That's something which, you know, from a realistic point of view, if nothing else, is not going to happen. So you've got that issue anyway. So you're going to have people not washing their hands. You've got people going into hospitals and not using hand gel at the moment, or before this happened. So you know, you're not going to be able to stop that one. So realistically, it is that cleaning process that goes on throughout the shop. So making sure points that people are touching, whether they've got gloves on or not, are being cleaned regularly, keeping that interaction lower. So I'm going to say, don't worry too much about that one. That one will be treated in exactly the same way as somebody not wearing gloves, because in essence, whether they've got gloves on or not, shouldn't make any difference there. Shouldn't make any difference there. Just look at the final question we've got. So we've got so a couple more questions coming in now. What if you have to put in place all the safety procedures required in the workplace, but a member of staff does not want to return to work? So hopefully we've been through that one. I think that's just, unless you've got anything to add to that one. Allowing holidays to be carried over for an additional year. Does this apply to all furloughed workers?
Yeah, the government have said that you can carry four weeks over and take it over the next 2 years. So it is part of the changes that the government have made. So that's because obviously people can't, well, you know, they're on furlough anyway, so they can't take holidays, or don't want to take holidays while they're on furlough. So, you know, and the situation of the country, you know, you can't go anywhere and take your holiday. So you know, the government have offered that up in terms of allowing people to sort of take it over, you know, the next 2 years, which is, I think, is very positive. Yeah.
Another question on holidays, actually. It says, can we encourage staff on furlough to take their holidays during this time? We will pay them the difference between the furlough amount and full pay. We're a small team, and to comprehend, this level of holiday isn't advisable at this time remaining from June onwards. So can people be incentivized to take their holidays, I think is the question.
They can, but they, you know, at the moment, because they're on furlough, they're probably going to stick with furlough. You're more likely to use it when you come to the end of that furlough period, and if you're considering from a business, you know, the viability of the business and need people to go off for a while, then, you know, that's an option with holidays. Yeah, it's whilst they're on furlough, they're probably just going to stick with the furlough.
Yeah, I think that probably answers it. It's basically, can you top up their pay to the full amount from the 80% if they take their holidays, to encourage them to take their holidays, I think is the.
Yeah, I mean, you can top up their pay, because that, you know, what the government are offering is the minimum, so you can, as a business, top up their pay. So I guess it's probably one that you'd want to just check out, in terms of you know, what you would do, because you can, you know, as I say, you can top up their pay, and that's fine. Therefore, there is no reason why they can't go on holiday, I guess, if they want to at this point in time. So it's yeah, probably one that just needs looking into a little bit more. It's a little bit of an interesting one that I probably want to look into it a bit more. Probably the Growth Hub, point them to the Growth Hub and get some advice through that.
Yeah, and certainly that's a point to make here. If you want any further advice, do contact the Humber Growth Hub. We've got another one which is about insurance. So my insurance company will not tell me if I'm insured for what we do when we can reopen to customers on the 1st of June. How do I know if I'm legally covered from an insurance point of view? So I'm assuming this is employee liability insurance here. And as I'm going to say from a legal point of view, that would be the main consideration, although the others should be. I think public liability, that should be a legal requirement, but from an employee's liability. Jill, do you have anything to say on the employee's liability and how that might be affected if they're unsure whether that's covered?
That's a tricky one in terms of,
I think it is a tricky one. I mean, I can give you a bit from my experience of my insurance company, because I've been on to my insurance company about whether I'm covered from a client's point of view, and things like that, clients contacting. What they've advised me here is there is no insurance claim in this point if it's in sort of communal areas. Providing it's in communal areas, there is no insurance. My insurance have said there is no insurance claim, so I would be covered for customers if they picked it up from other customers or things like that, as long as I can show what measures I've put in place and that I'm not asking people to do anything against any advice. I'm going to say that probably will cover most insurances in the same way, and I think a lot of insurance companies are going to be very political in their answers.
Yeah, well, they will always want, as you said, you know, what have you actually done? You know, can you demonstrate every step that you took, etc. You know, that is going to be critical in terms of whether they would go down that route or not.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, when we're talking about risk assessments, most people have risk assessments and health and safety policies which get filed away and never used because they're from an insurance point of view. They're protecting your backside in some ways, with it being too. But unfortunately, that is reality. That's what we have to do. So do document everything that you do. You know, and again, your marketing comes into this one. Taking photos of what you're doing and marketing it out has a twofold effect. Not only does it show people what you're doing and show your customers so they're all confident and happy, but it documents it as well. So all of that can be used as documentation. So have your risk assessments, make sure they're publicly available, you know, available to people. Make sure that they're thorough and they've gone through. And this is why, like I said before, I think there's going to be a huge influx where there's going to be HSE and that are going to come down hard on people who have had generic ones done and filed them away and not used them and not really thought about it. And I really don't like that. They keep away from that. Do it yourself. Document it the best you can. These people, the councils, HSE, are real people. They want to see that you're doing everything you can, and they look on that a lot better than somebody with a perfect document which they've not implemented. So yeah, hopefully that's answered that to a point, but not, unfortunately, we haven't got a straight answer for that one because it is a lot down to your insurance company. The next one is, as a non-furloughed employee, can also carry out, sorry, I'm just trying to read, so I'm reading this one. As a non-furloughed employee, can I also carry over 4 weeks holiday to be taken in the next 2 years as not able to take holiday now? Sorry, I misread that one to start off with.
Yeah, in terms of that does cover everybody. It's not just furloughed employees, because everybody's in the same boat at the moment. You know, nobody can really take any holidays at the moment when you're in lockdown and things like that. So yeah, you know, they've changed, you know, what we would normally say when we say you can't carry over after a year. It's now 2 years and 4 weeks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all the questions that I've got up here at the moment. So if there are any further questions, please do contact the Humber Growth Hub, who will be able to help you along with that. I'd like to thank Jill for her presentation today. Really, I found it really informative. So thank you very much, and certainly for answering the questions thrown at you there at the end. So yeah, very much there. as I say, there's a number of these sort of workshops happening, so do contact Humber Growth Hub to see what's available and which ones will be the most suitable for you. Details are on the slide there. And just as a final thing, if anybody would like a one-to-one, again, please contact the Growth Hub for that, and they'll be able to signpost you to the most relevant person to be able to help you with that question and be able to support you going forward. So, as I say, thank you very much, Jill, and most importantly, thank you very much for attending. And we look forward to seeing you on another workshop.
Thank you. Hi. Okay.